Howdy, I'm Wade, but y'all can call me Captain, squad leader of the 11th Legion, here on behalf of the Magical Containment Agency to assure you that this listen of Campaign Spotlight is not a government psyop. Enjoy.
Hey there, Deckers and Mages.
In our last interview of Season 3, we're chatting with Ev about running a campaign set in a gritty, realistic world.
Let's roll initiative.
It is Thursday, August 19th, 2078. It is 6:42 p.m. in Seattle, in the United Canadian and American States. And as the sun slowly drifts downwards towards the Earth, its rays manage to penetrate the smog over the Seattle Metroplex to provide some light in the day. Everywhere people are bustling, either downtown or uptown, in the barrens or the corporate enclaves, returning from work or going to work. But not you. For you, you're having a bit of a lazy Thursday. It's not that you're out of work, some of you might even have jobs, but right now it seems that you're caught in the moment between action where everything just holds still. Regardless, you're currently relaxing, but the question is where? Are you at your favorite watering hole, watching Trid in the comfort of your own home? Or are you eyeing the last dying rays of the sun as you think about the things that got you to this point and where you're going to be going next?
Ev, welcome to Campaign Spotlight.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
That is such a fun introduction. I mean, as like a Canadian living in Seattle, I genuinely don't know how I feel about the United American and Canadian States.
Oh yeah, the geopolitics of North American Shadowrun are a complete mess. I can get into it more later, but yeah.
I'm legitimately probably more excited about that than I should be for like a good interview, because I desperately want to talk about that. But first, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ev, or I perform under Eximius. I am 26 and live in Seattle, and I've come on here to talk about Shadowrun, particularly 5th edition, which I've had the most experience with. In my free time, I run a rave production group and throw events all in Seattle. But yeah, how I got into Shadowrun particularly was, I think it was about 7-8 years ago now. In my, when I just after I turned 18, I had started hanging out with friends, and all my friends when I was going through high school were all a bunch of nerds. We were the fuckers who would go on to who would go and play Smash during lunch, etc. But yeah, I had gotten involved with them with a couple of D&D things for a little bit, but those campaigns ended up usually falling apart. But it got me into tabletop RPGs, and I started digging deeper into alternative systems because
there's systems other than D&D. I'm mind blown.
That's crazy.
Huge if true.
Yeah, huge if true. And I ended up messing around with a couple of other things Paranoia and Eclipse Phase and Rogue Trader and / Only War from the Warhammer stuff.
Right.
But yeah, Shadowrun is what really stuck with me because of its setting and rich lore and just the way that it really manages to create a very engaging and full world for you to insert people into.
And so at this point, you've played quite a bit of Shadowrun and also run some campaigns.
Yeah, I've run a couple of campaigns, too, that have, lasted further than a couple of sessions, and have played in, I would say, at least half a dozen campaigns, and also been in some like one-shot things, and also participated in living communities, which are basically like a persistent online. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think it would be great if you explained for the audience what a persistent community is in this context.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like groups on Reddit or whatever who have like a basically like a continually running like Shadowrun world with multiple
Yes.
DMs and players, where the DMs, get like basically vetted in order to run games, and the players like submit character sheets to be inserted into this community. And then you're just one, Shadowrunner inside like the city doing jobs, and being part of like this greater whole thing that doesn't necessarily like involve you all the time. Like you can just take off for a few months or whatever and come back and then start taking jobs and playing sessions again.
And how big are these communities?
I would say the largest have like a few like up to like 1,000 to like a couple thousand maybe people. Not obviously not all active at the same time.
Sure.
But like yeah, and there's a lot of people who will make like multiple characters to play depending on like what they're feeling. Yeah, it's kind of like I think this is something that like the West Marches campaign or like
Yes.
structure. It's very similar to that if I'm correct, but I'm not very familiar with that.
Yeah, so I want to talk more about these persistent communities actually, but let's back up a bit and tell people what Shadowrun is first.
Yeah. So Shadowrun is a cyberpunk tabletop RPG that was like started like around in the 90s, and then like started like getting bigger like through the early 2000s. It is unique in its like in its style of cyberpunk RPG, where it marries like cyberpunk, classic cyberpunk elements, cyberware, like corporate dystopia,
Sure.
like high tech, low life existence. But in addition, in the Shadowrun universe in the year 2012, magic violently returned to the Earth. Yeah, violently might be an understatement in this case, but like, and so you have fantasy elements inside it also. Like a lot of people basically spontaneously what's known as goblinized and turned into orcs or trolls.
Hell yes.
You have dwarves, elves, human, dwarves, elves, trolls, and orcs are the 5 like main playable races. Though there's all kinds of other things like shapeshifters and everything else in there. There's dragons. There's obviously magic, and it has a rich and complex magic system with all kinds of different, how do I say it? I always forget what it's called. Belief systems about how your magic works, which affects how it manifests, spirits, the astral plane, etc.
So in addition to having like a somewhat of a cyberpunk aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
The actual play of the game, it sounds like, is very much arcane, right? It is very much on
it
the
includes,
magic side.
I would say that it is more cyberpunk than it is magic. Like it is cyberpunk that has magic in it, rather than magic with cyberpunk. So like, it's still a cyberpunk dystopia with all your usual cyberpunk dystopian traits,
Right.
but with the addition of magic and all that comes with it mixed in. Yeah, and in Shadowrun, you take the role usually as of a Shadowrunner, which is basically a disposable like mercenary, that can be hired out by anyone with enough money in order to do dirty work that they don't want to do themselves.
Sure.
This could be, mega corporations, politicians, cops, random people who manage to scrounge up enough money, anyone who has something that they want dealt with that requires, discrete touch, and that requires deniable assets, we'll call upon Shadowrunners to do so.
Very cool. And so what you've described sounds like a really satisfying setting for an episodic game where a mission emerges and the player characters kind of do the mission.
Yeah.
How does an overarching campaign work?
So there's a lot of like different ways to structure a campaign. Some campaigns have like a very specific defined start to end point,
Right.
Where you're going through this very specific linear plot.
Right.
Some are a lot more freeform, in terms where you're just a person existing in a world, and the world just moves around you, and you occasionally influence how things go, based on what you do. And that's usually how I would run my campaigns, is where I would structure them around a meta plot, where there's this big event happening, this slow thing going on throughout the campaign, and the players find themselves tied into it somehow. But also, even while that's happening, they still have end up doing side jobs, things that aren't related to the main plot. They just end up working, of course, for whoever has the money to. And I usually would create several different missions at a time, and let them pick between them. Some of which would be time limited, and therefore if they didn't do them fast enough, they would just disappear.
And some of those missions would be the ones that drove the plot forward, whereas other ones would almost feel more like these persistent community jobs boards.
Yeah, it would be just effectively a side job, but I also wouldn't, tell them which ones drove the plot forward or which ones didn't. It was the way that I like to do it is I like to see if they can figure out what's going on around them, when they're basically pawns in this much larger game.
Extremely cool. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, from one of the campaigns you run, what was that larger plot like?
Yeah, so the main one that I've thought to talk about was a campaign that was set in Seattle. For all Seattle fans out here, Seattle is basically the default setting in Shadowrun, and which is very funny because I started playing Shadowrun before I ever moved out here.
Oh, wow. Because Seattle feels we have the income inequality. We have the rain. We have the cool LEDs sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
A lot of the more real world aspects of cyberpunk worlds, like amoral tech billionaires and, I don't know, people wearing countercultural outfits.
Yeah.
Feels like Seattle has more of that than most of the U.S.
Yeah, and in the Shadowrun universe, it's also just kind of a big hub because it is an exclave of the United Canadian American States, because in the early 2000s, 2020s, 2030s, the Native American nations, as they're so called, broke away from the United States using magic to basically cause multiple volcano eruptions all over. It's a whole insane story.
This is a hell of a setting. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the United Canadian and American States encompasses the Northeast, down to Virginia.
Okay.
And then goes in the Midwest, and then Ontario, Toronto, Montreal,
Sure.
etc. But then all the Great Plains and stuff are the Native American nations, which are independent. You have California, which exists as an independent state, that is constantly getting shit kicked in by everyone around it, basically. And then you have Seattle, which is the last exclave of the UCAS on the West Coast.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and also you have the Confederate American States to this in the South. Though to be fair, in this one they are not uber racist or whatever. It is more just a Southern identity thing, I could guess. Though racism is definitely a quality that comes up in Shadowrun.
Yeah, I feel like, any future state that is like, you know what we should name ourselves after. It's a cool brand that we want to have.
Yeah.
Probably like reconsider that one. I don't know.
Yeah,
So we're talking. Go for it. Go for
Yeah,
it.
you can't, can't exactly tell them to come up with a better one, but yeah.
So what's going on in your campaign?
So my players were basically dropped into this larger meta plot about a group of individuals who have cognitive fragmentation disorder, which is a disease caused by nanite infestation that causes basically their brain and personality to be overwritten by AI. In the 2076 or 2077,
Okay.
This basically broke out of containment in Boston when they were doing research on a dragon and trying to see if they could, control said dragon through the use of nanites and personality overwriting. And they broke out, spread these nanites all over Boston, and basically turned a bunch of people into effectively zombies. It's kind of like ghouls and Fallout. A lot of people just end up feral and like unable to control their personality or actions.
Right.
But some will end up as a fully sentient and like intelligent and capable of pursuing agenda beyond further than just like their immediate survival.
And that's what the PCs were.
No, this was basically the people who were driving the meta plot forward.
Got it.
Yeah, because their whole goal was to subvert enough people inside high-level positions in, Seattle, in, corporations, the military, police, government, etc., and gangs to basically do a second Boston lockdown. That's what it's referred to in the series, and turn all of Seattle into their people like them.
Like the show iZombie.
Yeah,
Spoilers,
I don't think I'm not
for
familiar, but yeah.
It's zombies in Seattle. It's very much shot in Vancouver disguised as Seattle. And
of course.
It doesn't work. I mean, the show's great, but I'm from Vancouver, and seeing that passed off as Seattle the whole time, I'm like, no, don't do this. Anyway, sorry, that's a little off topic. Cool. So and so in your campaign, the players were gradually, over the course of accepting these missions, they were sometimes just doing unrelated tasks and sometimes learning about this grander metaplot.
Yeah. So the players were basically used as pasties by said group of people with CFD to assemble pieces of the puzzle, like, either acquire the equipment and stuff that they would need to eventually do this, or, acquire people for them in order to subvert. And they were treated well and well compensated, which naturally got them suspicious because Johnson's people who give jobs in Shadowruns are notorious for screwing you over if they can get away with it, and dug into it. However, in this case, they only got to the first layer of their cover, which was basically a knight errant, which is the police, like privatized police force of Seattle, Black Ops squad doing quote unquote lobbying by force in order to ensure they had favorable outcomes during upcoming contract negotiations with the city.
Oh, that kind of feels like real life.
Yeah, and didn't end up digging much further than that.
Got it.
And as time progresses and they have their like side story knocked out, I literally had like an evil plan progress bar, like in my own notes.
I feel like
that would like go up or down depending on what was happening.
You gotta actually make that visible to the players. Like sometimes when your players are like, let's do a beach session, it would be nice to be like, hey, look, here's the clock. We're 2 minutes from midnight. Stop having your beach session and get into the plot.
Well, I did have a little like basically way out for them at the end if they never realized what they were getting into. So after a particularly sloppy job for the CFT individuals,
Sure.
where they left a lot of evidence and like went really hot, they were black bagged by a multi-corporate task force that was investigating this thing and got interrogated. And when they realized they weren't knowing participants, let in on the truth of what was actually happening.
Sure.
And given a choice. Flip on their employers and help them take them down, or get 2 shots to the back of the head and be dumped out of the back of a moving truck in the Barrens. So you can probably guess which one they picked.
And so that's how you got them kind of learning what was going on and fighting back against it.
But of
And
course,
working for the multinational corporations?
yeah, well, you know, in this situation, I would definitely say that they were the lesser evil. And it's not like they weren't doing jobs for corporations before. Shadowrun has basically jobs that are more morally bad
Sure.
are compensated more financially, but less with karma, which is the way that you improve your stats and, you know, skills in Shadowrun. So you literally can trade money for karma or karma for money.
Just like the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's what carbon offsets are, maybe.
Something like that, basically.
And then, so a player over time levels up, I guess, either in an actual campaign or in like an online persistent community type setting by accumulating karma.
Yeah, it's a classless, levelless system. You have attributes, skills, qualities, and, you know, various other things that you can spend your karma on, but there's no like set route of how you have to spend it. You just freely spend it in whatever you desire, and it's much easier to go broad than wide. Like going to level 1 in a skill takes 2 karma, but going to level 6, it's twice as much karma per level, so it's 12 karma.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And the way that Shadowrun works mechanically, it's a D6 pool system for resolving checks, which if anyone isn't familiar, you roll X number of D6s equal to whatever your attributes plus skills plus modifiers say you should, and 5 or 6s on that count as success. If you have enough successes to do whatever you're trying to do, either reach like this threshold or overcome someone else's, you know, that determines the result.
I love systems like this because you end up rolling like huge chunky handfuls of dice, which is really satisfying.
When you're doing like the thing that you're specialized to do, it is so satisfying to just pull out like fucking 24 dice and just like dump it on the table. Yeah.
So, and I want to talk a little bit more about these jobs, because to me this is something that is a little bit different than how most tabletop games work, which is that you're getting paid money and you're having to keep track of it.
Yeah, you spend your money on, you know, like gear and cyberware, and, you know, for magicians you can buy magical foci, which help you like do magic better, etc. And, you know, getting better guns, better cyberware, everything like that. Or, you know, bribing people, or, you know, getting a nicer lifestyle, because that's a major thing about Shadowrun is you have to pay rent.
Right, which makes it a little bit different. Like, I feel like a lot of old school tabletop games have this idea that, you know, gold and XP are the same thing, but you tend to get that by like looting the dungeon, right? Whereas here, a large company pays you, and then some of that money goes towards like paying rent and buying groceries.
Yes. Yeah, because you need a place to live. You're just someone living in the city, like on paper.
Yeah, no, 100%. It just seems like a lot more. I don't want to say grounded, because there are like elves and zombies and stuff, but it does seem like there's a level of realism to considerations about your character.
It's grounded in the sense that the world functions in a way that is recognizable to us in, like, you know, people's daily routines and daily lives. You know, the average person, you know, goes to their job, gets home, watches TRID, which TV, you know, like does whatever that they find like interesting, does their hobbies, goes out and party. it is our world, just with the addition of 70 years of cyberpunk and magic dystopia.
Right, right. I mean, so it is like a pretty heightened version of our world, but people are fundamentally playing, I don't want to say grounded characters. They're not like completely grounded because you do have guns and magic, but also characters who like, you're not like an epic fantasy hero.
Yes.
And it's not like the campaign ends with you becoming, and we talked a little bit about this last season where like old school versions of Dungeons and Dragons really assumed that like you level up fighter until you become a warlord. You level up cleric until you become like a cult leader or a saint, right? And like the characters' journeys are like almost becoming legendary heroes or becoming folk heroes.
Yeah.
And Shadowrun's trying to have Shadowrunners do something a little bit different, eh?
Yeah, it's I would say the primary motivation for a lot of Shadowrunners getting into Shadowrunning is they have done something that ensures that they cannot have a normal life and work like a normal 9 to 5, or they don't want that for whatever reason, and they have to work in this dirty criminal industry in order to make a living and theoretically eventually retire and have a comfortable life. While some runners will inevitably end up becoming prime runners, which is the term for like the highest level and most capable runners who have access to like large amounts of resources and are very well skilled.
Right.
A lot of them die along the way, or get forced into retirement or just quit because they can't keep it going for whatever reason. And so, yeah, you do end up with people who become effectively, underground legends, street legends, and that are spoken about as like inspiration. And a lot of one of the things I like about the Shadowrun rule books is it's always full of little flavor of said people said like street legends chiming in on whatever it is describing or talking about. Like basically giving their own takes on it or adding a little bit of extra flavor.
Got it. And so that's one of the ways that you as the GM can kind of impart a little bit more about the history of the world or what's going on as well.
Yeah, the books are canonically basically data dumps on a underground, Shadowrunning BBS.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so it's like if someone just posted a giant PDF on a forum and the forum users could comment on it.
That feels like definitely something that is like a 2000s understanding of how the internet would turn out.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's a lot cooler than Discord, but anyway.
Oh, for sure.
And like, so when players are operating in this world where like they're trying to make enough money to retire comfortably
or pursue whatever other agenda they might be into, like, some of them get into it because they want revenge or the ability to, do whatever goal that comes to their mind. And they can't get the resources or whatever to do that in a normal way.
Got it. Okay. So you come in with a certain motivation, and that motivation is like a little bit, I don't want to say grounded, but it's definitely motivation that's like quite personal, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You're not coming in with an intrinsic. You're not coming in with an intrinsic like hero type motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like how to ask this, for someone who's run a lot of campaigns where the players come in knowing that they're going to be heroes and that they're going to be doing the things they're doing and risking it all because they're trying to like save the universe or something like that. What's it like running a game where you have to kind of keep track in the back of your head that people have these motivations like, I would like to retire comfortably, or like, I would like to take down my arch rival or something like that?
Yeah. So the way that I would do that is, by if they, in the downtime of the campaign, Shadowrun jobs it's basically a heist a movie like structure. So you get the job, you meet the guy giving you the job, the Johnson, you do your legwork, to figure out what you need to do in order to act and figure out like any information that you might need for this job. You plan it out and then you execute it and then you deal with the consequences. And in between said jobs, there's usually, like maybe like a week or a couple of weeks or longer, depending,
Sure.
where you have downtime and you're free to pursue your own agenda. Which might be, like getting some extra money or tracking down your arch rival. And, I make sure that people have the opportunity to, do that. For example, if someone has a vendetta against a certain mega corporation, I will put them in like a collision course with said, mega corporation, either by, them doing a job for them and then having to deal with their, hatred of them while they're working for them, etc.
That feels like a very Seattle storyline somehow.
Yeah.
And I guess that also gives the players a bit of a chance to like drive the story themselves, right? Because part of like what it means to be in a cyberpunk world, I think, is that there's this like tier of people who are so powerful and kind of hold all the strings and call all the shots.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is just kind of like living by their rules. But you're playing a tabletop campaign. You also want to be able to move the needle on the overall world yourselves.
Yeah. Just like the corporate CEOs and like the mega corporations or something so fathomably large that in case you get like, unless you get incredibly lucky and you just get this one opportunity, you couldn't really take one of them down yourselves. I've mentioned dragons a couple of times, but dragons are basically the most powerful magical beings in Shadowrun and also incredibly intelligent. And some of them are even running said mega corporations.
Right.
So they're as their own personal hoard. Instead of sitting on a pile of gold, they're sitting on a pile of stock options. But even said like dragons, which are immeasurably more powerful than any like regular player will ever be, can still be killed.
Right.
You can still move the lever. I don't think you could, you can't save the world, but you can make a difference. And I think that's like a much more engaging thing than just saying that people can like just completely upturn the world.
Right. If I try hard enough, I can go out there and like kill the demon god and bring the sun back to the sky and everything like that. Like in a like a kind of classical fantasy campaign.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, most of the world won't, like, know that you did it. All this stuff happens by definition in the shadows.
Right.
But you'll have the satisfaction that, you changed something. You went out and you moved the lever a little bit.
I really like that. I mean, is that what... Because one thing I've been curious about, and I've wanted to get your take on is, what appeals to you as the GM about running a campaign like that is a little bit more, where the stakes are a little bit more, okay, by the end game you will have made the world slightly better and, anonymously so. Yeah.
Well, assuming that your group of players is the kind that wants to make the world better.
Okay, well, yeah.
Sometimes they're, pretty black, so... And they might just be completely self-interested and want to just get ahead for themselves.
Have you ever run a campaign like that?
I've had people who are, players who play characters that are more like lean towards that direction, but not like a whole campaign where everyone was just like evil basically or just out for themselves.
It does feel like this is a system where being completely evil and out for yourself, it poses a bit of a challenge for the GM, right? Because on one hand, you want their actions and their self-absorbedness to have like some consequences.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you want like you are trying to tell a story here in the end.
Yeah. Usually just let it work out naturally through the pace through like the sessions, and them working with their team, because you can't be a Shadowrunner really well by yourself. You can't jobs require like a variety of skills, you know,
Right.
in the Matrix, like the hacking area of it, in magic, and you know, infiltration and social skills like social infiltration and manipulation.
Can you give
And
a sense of how that's played out in your campaigns? Like a time when you've had one of these players who is more self-interested, and what it look like when that played out?
yeah, I can. So this isn't necessarily from one of my campaigns, but
Sure.
it's the first. This is from one that a character that I played
Awesome.
in one campaign, which was a fully cyberwared out. For those of you who are familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, effectively a high functioning cyber psycho, and who was had very little empathy for their fellow man, was basically a psychopath, and would just relentlessly throw themselves into like combat. And the reason that got into Shadowrunning was because she was too fucking crazy in order to, you know, blend in with normal society, and needed a way to get her kicks.
I mean, that really does feel like a fun cyberpunk trope, but like, how did the party handle? Because like, on one hand, that's like a lot of fun to hear about as a character. On the other hand, playing next to that character seems like it would be
Well, it definitely got him into trouble when I would, you know, play him out as like way too enthusiastic about you know, certain things. Like there was one mission where we had to basically assault the like a precinct of the police
as one does.
and rescue someone from there. And she went in and started going really hard on like just killing a bunch of police officers, which was gratuitously unnecessary and almost ended up with her getting killed, and also led to a bunch of extra heat on them for said action.
Right, but and how does the party deal with that? I guess how does the party move forward from like, you know, okay, we did the mission, but it didn't go in the way that everyone else would have wanted it to be done.
Well, you know, in some cases, if one of the players is too much of a liability, the party might just take him out. And, you know,
so it's PvP enabled.
well, you know, depending on if you want to play it that way. But yeah, in this case, it was kind of like a cost benefit analysis. Like the benefit of having this person around is worth the cost of them being a little fucking crazy.
That's real, yeah.
Yeah. And over time, with like working with the party, one of this character's growth was learning, you know, how to control themselves better and how to, you know, work better with other people.
Well, that's actually a fun arc.
Yeah.
I've definitely run campaigns where the whole party is lone wolves, and I would have loved if even one of them had kind of shown an inclination towards an arc like that.
Yeah.
In this setting, like things are a little bit more, you know, operating, how to say this, in a lot of fantasy settings, you know, things don't always operate according to real world logic, right? You know, the people don't worry about buying groceries, and like, you know, if you end up in jail or something like that, like I think the classic example in D&D is everyone goes and does their own separate persuasion check up to the guard and gets out of jail because one of them rolls a 25 on persuasion or something like that, where it's like, we know the world doesn't actually work that way, but in these games, and like in a lot of tabletop games, you know, the tropes make us like say, okay, we know this isn't realistic, but we're playing a game in a world with these tropes, and therefore we can kind of do these things. I'd love to get your sense of what it's like to run games in a world where the tropes are a little bit more, like not to say quotidian, but the tropes are definitely a little bit more tied to how the real world operates. Because when I think of cyberpunk, again, it's kind of just like Seattle now, but more so. And it seems like a lot of the tropes around like, oh well, we all have to worry about our debts, and we all have to, if we get captured, bad things will happen to us. Like it feels a lot more, I guess, grounded. Yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on running games in that kind of setting.
Yeah, there's literally a whole terminology for this in the setting, in the spectrum of like, I would say how realistically the world reacts to your actions, where
Sure.
at the least realistic, it is called Pink Mohawk. And in the veil of, those old like 90s cyberpunk action movies where they're just hosing people down with automatic gunfire. And like, just, if you get away from the cops, it's like GTA. You escape the cops, and then there's not going to be any consequences after that.
You go to the bar right after that.
Exactly. Like it operates just like on action movie logic,
Right.
in that sense. To like all the way at the other end, which is Black Trenchcoat, which it operates. The world reacts to your actions the way the world would actually react if this happened, in the sense that, if you kill a bunch of people, the police are going to start developing like a case file on you.
Right.
They're going to start like trying to track you down. If you go to jail, you're probably not going to be able to get out easily without a very good lawyer or some nice connections. If you, piss off a high level like corporation enough to the point where you become like an active problem for them,
Sure.
they will, start going after you in more than one way. And if you're like a terrorist effectively and known for killing loads of people, your contacts will start ghosting you and being like, because you're way too hot to work with.
Right. It's like a level of how, I guess, how persistent
Yeah.
the heat is, where at one end of the scale, the heat just kind of goes away the moment you're out of sight.
Yeah.
And at the other end, it's like, oh, like I have like a whole record of my history that people are aware of.
Yeah. There's also like systems inside the game to track this. There's two different stats that you have. One is public awareness, which is, just how generally aware the public is of you. That can be good or bad, like there's a joke in LA in Shadowrun, a lot of Shadowrunners literally will like run their lives like a reality TV show, and like record their things and upload them for consumption.
I love the idea that you can like play as a streamer.
Yeah. But there's also notoriety, which is just generally how like known you are for doing fucked up shit.
Right.
So if you have too high notoriety, you might just end up like losing your contacts. You might end up people having like in the street just like seeing you and calling the police, being like, "Hey, that's the guy who blew up like a convenience store the other week."
A convenience store.
I don't know.
Shit. That's very villainous.
Yeah, like just like, or like that's the guy who killed all these security guards like when they were trying to break into there. Those security guards have families.
Right.
They're deceased family members. They're gonna go bother the police, or they're gonna go bother the police to go like track you down. They're going to start like like public like they're gonna start campaigns in order to like figure out what the hell is going on.
Sure.
Or they might just like hire other Shadowrunners or just criminals to like come after you and get you. Like.
And I guess like in a more, if you're running this in a more of like a Pink Mohawk way, then the cooldown on that is fast.
Yeah.
The families of the security guards, like they get married, remarried real quick.
It only has consequences if it would be interesting for the plot, like
that makes sense.
Whereas in the other end of it, it has consequences, no matter what. But also like there's still a lot of like wiggle room for what you can do in Shadowrun. Like you don't have to be entirely straight-laced. You can still do like all kinds of things. It just depends on who you piss off, how much you piss them off, and if it's worth coming after you. Because the corporations, they still operate, on the law of profit. They need to make money, and just chasing after someone who has done a run against them is not like usually economically viable, like because you're just a disposable asset. You're not the person who actually pulled the strings in order to make this happen. You're just a tool.
So there's pretty good in-game reasons that sometimes they leave you alone anyway.
Yes. In fact, like sometimes, like if you do a run against a corporation and you do it really well, they might hire you based on that because they're like, oh, well, you can do this, so you could do a good job for us also, probably.
Probably.
Usually in a more coercive manner than just being like, hey, we saw your break-in and thought you had a really good vibe.
Would you like some stock options?
Yeah, exactly. But usually being like, yeah, like do this for us, or we will, turn you in with all your evidence, but we'll also pay you if you do it.
Sure, right. You're really giving the players an offer they can't refuse.
Exactly.
Where along that continuum, I guess, do you tend to play, from the pink Mohawk to black trenchcoat?
So there's a term for in the middle of the spectrum, which is mirror shades, which is kind of generally where I lean it. Or I will have like certain jobs in like a campaign will lean harder like one way or the other. Because it's always fun to give your players an opportunity to do some crazy stuff, like to blow some things up and engage in some really what would it be, like unrealistic activity.
Right.
And there's areas where you can do that without consequences. For example, in Seattle, the Redmond Barrens are effectively like a lawless zone that is walled off from the rest of Seattle, which is just full of like ghouls,
in the
criminals.
Game or in real life?
Yes. And just people who have nothing, like can't afford to go anywhere else that's actually nice, or don't have a SIN, which is basically social security number plus citizenship tied into one whole thing. If you don't have a SIN, which is somewhere around half the population, you effectively have no rights. And you can get one of those from the government or from a corporation. But if you don't have one of those, nobody's going to give a shit what happens to you, which is also most of the players.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's a whole nother aspect of the thing.
And I guess playing somewhere in the middle makes sense, because at one end of the scale, if you're in full-on pink Mohawk world, nothing seems real. There's not really going to be stakes.
Yeah.
You can just kind of do shit and narrate yourself being cool. And then at the other end of the scale, it's like, at a certain level of realism, the only way to take down a mega corporation is to like file a petition of shareholder fraud to the SEC, or like, be a high-powered lawyer in some way like that. And
yeah,
assuming
they don't just off you while you're doing it.
Right. I was gonna say, yeah, maybe there's a whole separate like game that exists where you're just doing paperwork to take down a mega corporation. But like, I don't think that in Shadowrun, being at either one of those extremes seems a little bit difficult to me in terms of telling a story that would be fun and interesting with your friends.
Yeah, I think like a good example of what like Shadowrun in like full black trench coat would be.
Sure.
Have you seen Mr. Robot?
I haven't. No, Riley just did like a 180.
Yeah. Mr. Robot would be like a great example of what like a black trench coat decker, which is the term for hacker in Shadowrun would be, because you are like, you can still make a difference, but only if the powers that be allow you to, or you get really lucky like in the end.
Got it. Okay, that is pretty satisfying in terms of like what a, grounded, realistic, big sweeping change to the world would be. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess for a player who's having their first experience in this kind of setting, right? For a player for whom they're used to kind of more of a classical fantasy vibe, and now they're dipping their toes in with Shadowrun, like what should they expect in terms of the ways that groundedness is going to affect the gameplay?
Well, yeah, just like off the top, you might just die. Like Shadowrun is a dangerous job, and even though you might be cybernetically or magically enhanced, and Shadowrunners are like basically still effectively the 1% in terms of like power in society, in terms of like the ability to do like combat or like hack or whatever.
Right.
But enough bullets will take down anyone, and if you are sloppy or stupid or don't or go into an elevator that happens to have fragmentation grenades taped to the top of the ceiling.
Hate it when that happens.
There's rules for what's called chunky salsa.
Oh no!
Where explosions in confined spaces will basically bounce around and hit you multiple times, and usually inflicting enough damage to kill basically anyone.
I mean, that sounds like what would happen. To some extent, that is a little bit more satisfying, because I feel like in a lot of games I play, when you're at high level, a grenade going off near you doesn't really hurt you that much.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, when I was at level 1, a grenade would have really hurt me, but now that I am a high level wizard, I can tank some grenade blasts, and that maybe feels a little bit less satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of one of, and there's ways to mitigate like getting hit by stuff. Like one of the attributes that you have in Shadowrun is called Edge, which is basically synonymous with luck.
Okay.
And you can use Edge to improve your rolls, or as kind of if you die, you can burn one of your Edge, which is permanently lose one of your attribute points.
Ooh.
And in that, and basically have divine intervention or whatever keep you alive. So you can get around things, but sometimes it is also satisfying just to see. Sometimes like it just makes sense for a character to die, like
right.
Narratively, and the player might want to try someone new.
So you've mentioned quite a few resources that the players have to manage, right? In terms of like in terms of their leveling, in terms of their notoriety, in terms of just the mechanics of the game. How do you implement that? Like, especially, I'm really thinking not just about things like karma and edge, but also things like gold, right, or money, right?
New yen.
So what's it called?
New yen.
Oh my gosh, that's so 90s.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it is very 90s. I think cyberpunk in general was like a large part of it is that 90s fear of like, oh, Japan's going to buy all of America. So
right.
Hence like, yeah, there's a lot of like emphasis on like Japanese culture and like Japanese like hegemony, I guess.
That will be the currency of the future, definitely. Yeah. I guess, especially with money, like, it seems that there's a lot of bookkeeping that has to happen, right? People are keeping track of their living expenses, and that's central to the game. How do you implement that in a way that makes it feel fun?
It is a very crunchy system. Okay. There's a lot going on. And generally speaking, like for stuff that isn't as fun or just tedious to deal with, like I will just kind of like hand wave it or do it arbitrarily.
Interesting. Okay.
Because, for example, if you are shooting at someone, you have to do your attribute plus for shooting plus your shooting skill.
Yes.
Combine those together to get your pool, and then you stack up on top of modifiers, which can be haze, lighting, distance, etc. that will reduce the number or add number to the dice in your pool.
I love when combat takes 20 minutes per turn.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I will just pick an arbitrary like modifier for the conditions instead of like going through the tables and finding the exact number, because otherwise it would take like 5 minutes per shot.
Riley and I have tried some systems in the flashlights where there's a lot of looking things up in tables, and combat runs real slowly, and it somehow feels less real.
Yeah.
I don't know, like when we played this game where you had to describe where you were attacking the other person, and they had to describe how they were either blocking or attacking you, and it was just table on table, and at the end of it, it was like, I've completely forgotten that we're narrating combat.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of get the merits of just saying like, yeah, that's going to be like 8d6.
Yeah. Combat is also, it's generally like, it's simultaneously like can be slow, but is also very fast.
Right.
People die quickly.
Right.
You have, armors and ways of mitigating or dodging getting hit. but like most enemies will die in one shot against like someone who's properly trained if they're not like on their level. Um, so, and each, the way that combat works is you have your initiative, and each round of combat, you have your total initiative number, which can be anywhere from like single digits to like up to 40 if you're fully spec'd and having like high reaction speed and high initiative. You go through the list starting at the top with whoever has the highest initiative.
Right.
Each person takes their turn, and then you subtract 10 from that initiative number, and then everyone who still has initiative left takes another turn, takes another action.
Oh, so high initiative means you actually just get to act more frequently.
Exactly. So if you have like say 37 initiative versus someone who has like 12, that person will only get to act twice, whereas you will get to act 4 times in the course of a round. And once everyone runs out of initiative, you roll initiative again, and that decides, the next round. But usually, in my experience, it is incredibly rare for combat to last more than one round, where you have to roll initiative a second time.
Interesting. Like what you're describing sounds like a system that is not for a beginner GM.
Yeah, no, you need to know a lot. Not just like in terms of rules, but also about the setting and also about like, how to like structure a campaign. And I think it's one of the reasons that there's not that many people who play Shadowrun. It's just a hard system to get into because it requires you to like front load all this knowledge. Whereas like in D&D, you can get someone into D&D in like 15 minutes,
Right.
know?
Well, I think with D&D, a big distinction is like, okay, so with Shadowrun or D&D or any other system, there's knowing the mechanics, there's knowing the lore, there's knowing how, like, the expectations people have of a campaign. But then there's also just this other separate thing, which is knowing how to, like, what actually running the game looks like in practice and like what you can hand wave away, what people really want to dwell on. And like it sounds like in this system, you can hand wave away some of the combat logistics when they get to be too crunchy.
Yeah, or just, some of the hacking stuff is also like can be tedious, or just just like a lot of like small things in general. There's rules for basically everything if you want to go into them, but a lot of times it is not worthwhile. So if I don't know how to like rule something exactly, I'll just be like, all right, attribute plus skill for whatever this is related to, and assign arbitrary number that they have to meet in order to do it.
Right, and knowing how to do that, like I think the thing that makes Dungeons & Dragons different from pretty much any other system is that you can really easily learn how to do that, like when you can hand wave what that number should be, because there's like thousands of people streaming it, right? And we can just like, the best way to learn how to play D&D is you just watch some actual plays of professional D&D players. Yeah. And for any other system pretty much, especially something like Shadowrun that's a little bit more niche, you don't have that. Like when you start out, I guess when you start out jamming, how did you build that ability to know what you could and couldn't hand wave?
There's a lot of like information out there, like on Reddit or whatever, from people who've played a lot, giving you like suggestions. For example, like the books want you to stat out all your enemies, but because there's so many stats and everything like that to keep track of, that's really difficult. So someone came up with this system called the Rule of 3, where each character or each NPC has, rolls a certain amount of dice or like in multiples of 3, depending on how good they should be at that action, where like they'll roll 3 if they're completely untrained at it, to where they will roll like, 18 or like 21 if they're like some of the best in the world, at it. Like if they're really good. So like, like an average security guard might have like 9 dice to shoot because, they're just rent-a-cop basically. They don't actually like get trained that well.
Right.
And so, or like a like an actual proper like SWAT team, like rapid response team, might have like 15, 18, something like that dice.
So there really is that same like, well, we have to hack the game a little bit to make it playable.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit harder to find.
Yeah, it's something that the community is basically like put a lot of thought in. I highly recommend like going on the Shadowrun subreddit. It has a lot of good information and a lot of like people who are really into it and can like help people figure stuff out.
That's actually a really helpful resource to point to. Do you, I guess, have any other tools or resources you use when you put together your games?
So there's a character creation program called Chummer, which is slang in Shadowrun for, friend or like person.
That sounds like so Homestuck to me. So continue.
Yeah. It was there before Homestuck.
It was there before Homestuck, yeah.
So, but it helps you keep track of all your things and like stuff that you need to spend on in character creation, making sure your character is rules legal when it is created. Because there's certain things that you can't get at character gen,
right?
That you might not like otherwise know about, and that's like incredibly helpful for navigating character generation because it's very in depth in terms of what you can do, and there's a lot of stuff to keep track of in that. There's also, if I can look this up really
absolutely
quick.
Yeah, and we'll link to Chummer and why not the subreddit as well
in
the show notes for anyone who's interested in getting into Shadowrun, because I think a lot of the interviews we've had, a lot of the conversations we've had end up being a bit of comparing and contrasting with Dungeons and Dragons, and we've had some guests make direct pleas to the audience to play other games, and on one hand I get where they're coming from. On the other hand, most systems, I'm going to say all systems, really do have some amount of like, okay, here's how the original authors wanted it to work. Here's how people actually play it in the real world, and finding out about that can be so hard.
So the thing that I want to go on YouTube, there's a channel called Complex Action, and they made this series of short YouTube videos called like the GM screen for Shadowrun that explain various things with little illustrations, like little stick figure illustrations.
Oh, perfect!
In like
we'll
a easily digestible and like cohesive way.
Excellent.
I would also just like, in terms of like less rule stuff, but more like just understanding the setting. There's a couple of Shadowrun CRPGs on like video games.
Yes.
That take place basically in the setting of the 4th edition.
Okay.
Which is a little bit like outdated for like 5th edition, but it nails the vibe incredibly well, even if it's not accurate to the rules of the game, and it gives you a really good feel of like what it is like to be a Shadowrunner and exist in this universe.
Getting the vibe is key.
Yeah, so Shadowrun Dragonfall and Shadowrun Hong Kong are 2 games that you can get, and they're dirt cheap because they've been out for a while.
Perfect.
But they're just really good and really like nail the feeling of the setting.
Right.
There's also a lot of really good written up like actual plays, like written up stories of games, or like stuff on YouTube where you can watch people play. There's one that I'll promote particularly, which is called Shadowrun Storytime.
Excellent.
It is a written up like 400-page thing of someone's 4th edition game that is absolutely bonkers and hilarious. But also just like really well written and engaging, and helps you get a feel for the setting of like having, and the people in it are like a bit more black hat and evil, and it's just very like good read.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll absolutely track that down and link to it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Are there beyond Shadowrun specific media, I guess, is there any other, books, TV shows, anything like that inspire you when you're putting a game together?
Yeah, I already mentioned Mr. Robot.
Yes.
As that's just for the feel of like what is it like to be someone who lives in a world that reacts realistically to their action when they're a criminal.
Right.
Yeah. I also highly recommend just like obviously all this classic cyberpunk movies are out there, but in terms of like what is it like to be a Shadowrunner,
Right.
I highly recommend like heist movies. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is Ocean's 11. And that could be, they could do a shot-for-shot remake of that with like a Shadowrun team and set it in that setting.
Can we be honest? The EMP in that movie, the EMP in that movie comes pretty close to being cyberpunk right there.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't seem like how EMPs work in the real world, although I'm honestly not sure about that.
I don't think that is very realistic either, but because you're playing with somewhere between 4 to 6 people, and sometimes like you have like NPC allies and stuff, so you have like this effectively an ensemble cast of characters who are getting together to do this job, and it really like nails the feeling of like going through a Shadowrun, because even if you're not literally stealing something, that's how it's paced.
Yeah, no, I hadn't really thought about how the pacing of cyberpunk and of like old school heists do have a lot in common. I really like that in comparison. Yeah.
Yeah. And like crime movies, generally speaking, like, you are just a criminal usually. So like it helps you get into the mindset to understand what it's like to live as a criminal and make your money illegally.
You could also just do some crimes maybe to get into that mindset.
Yeah. You heard it here first. Campaign Spotlight endorses doing crimes.
Oh no! You're gonna get us canceled. Okay.
Cut that out.
All right. Before we get shut down by, I don't know, the podcast police, I guess we should start wrapping up. Ev, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up?
Yeah, other than just like all the stuff that I mentioned already, like the Shadowrun games, subreddit, etc. In my personal life, I throw raves full-time in Seattle. I run Impact Foundation, which I'm sure some of you are listening have heard about. But come check that out. And I also DJ as myself as Eximius. And I will also get some links to you of some like living communities that people can check out, because I think that's a good first entry into the system, because you just have to figure out making a character. You don't have to assemble like a whole group of people to play and get them all on board. You can just, as an individual, go make a character. They'll help you make sure that it's legal to, rules legal, and actually like a good character to play. And they will, and then you'll be able to just play, game like sessions with people and participate at your own pace.
That sounds incredibly cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really cool to hear about Shadowrun.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Yippee.
That's all for this week.
I'm Production Master Riley.
And I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
If you enjoy the show, consider subscribing and leaving a review, which helps other people find Campaign Spotlight.
If you'd like to support our work, consider going to patreon.com/campaignspotlight and becoming a patron.
And if you want to be elite, you gotta do a righteous hack.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit foldedfrequencies.com/campaignspotlight.